The emergency council session on Xerion Prime had been called at the highest security level. Ambassador Keth'ra stood before the crystalline podium, her silver skin gleaming under the chamber's harsh artificial lights. Around her, representatives from 47 different species sat in perfect silence, their various forms of communication devices translating her words into hundreds of languages simultaneously. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The human delegation has arrived at Station Nexus, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of grave concern. We have confirmed reports of their disturbing behavioral patterns, physical contact rituals that appear to be some form of psychological manipulation or dominance display. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs. Delegate Vor'tec from the Reptilian Coalition raised one of his scaled arms. Ambassador, are you certain these contact rituals pose a threat to galactic stability? Keth'ra activated the holographic display behind her. Images of humans embracing, shaking hands, and patting each other on the back filled the air above the assembly. Several delegates recoiled visibly. Observe their behavior, she continued. They frequently engage in what they call hugs, forcibly wrapping their appendages around one another. They perform handshakes, gripping and manipulating each other's extremities. Most concerning of all, they engage in casual touching throughout their daily interactions, as if claiming ownership over one another's bodies. Dr. Zendar, the chief xenopsychologist, leaned forward in his seat. His species, the Mentari, communicated entirely through telepathic projection and found the concept of physical contact deeply unsettling. In our analysis, such behavior indicates either primitive territorial marking or advanced psychological warfare. Either possibility makes them unsuitable for inclusion in civilized galactic society. The assembly murmured their agreement. For thousands of years, the Galactic Federation had maintained peace through a strict code of non-contact protocols. Each species maintained their own physical space, communicating through technology, telepathy, or chemical signals. The idea of deliberately touching another being was considered the height of barbarism. Commander Dextar from the Military Advisory Board stood to address the chamber. His metallic exoskeleton clinked softly as he moved. I propose we implement immediate containment protocols. No human should be allowed physical proximity to any Federation citizen until we understand the true nature of their contact rituals. Agreed, Keth'ra nodded. The safety of our member species must come first. We cannot risk contamination of our peaceful society by these aggressive contact behaviors. The vote was unanimous. Humans would be banned from engaging in any form of physical contact with Federation citizens. They would be confined to designated areas on all Federation stations and vessels, with strict penalties for any violation of the no-contact protocols. 3 days later, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the human diplomatic vessel Aurora, watching the massive Federation station grow larger through the viewport. Beside her, Dr. Michael Torres adjusted his diplomatic credentials one final time, while Communications Officer Lisa Park ran through her translation protocols. Remember, Sarah said softly, we're here to establish peaceful relations. First impressions matter. Michael nodded, though he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The Federation's initial communications had been oddly formal, even for interspecies diplomacy. Any word on their customs, physical greetings, social protocols? Strange thing about that, Lisa replied, checking her datapad. They specifically mentioned something about maintaining appropriate physical distance and, quote, respecting personal boundaries. Seemed unusually emphatic about it. Sarah frowned. In her 20 years of diplomatic service, she'd learned that successful first contact often hinged on understanding and respecting cultural differences. But the Federation's messages had been vague, almost evasive about specific protocols. The Aurora docked with Station Nexus an hour later. As the human delegation prepared to disembark, they were met by a squad of Federation security officers in full environmental suits. The lead officer, whose species Sarah couldn't identify through the heavy protective gear, spoke through a mechanical translator. Human delegation, you'll proceed to designated Quarantine Area 7. Maintain minimum 3-meter distance from all Federation personnel at all times. Any attempt at physical contact will result in immediate detention. Sarah exchanged glances with her team. Quarantine? We were told this was a diplomatic meeting. Precautionary measures, the officer replied curtly. Follow designated path markers. Do not deviate. The walk through Station Nexus was unlike any diplomatic reception Sarah had ever experienced. Everywhere they went, Federation citizens hurried away from them, some pressing themselves against walls to maintain distance. Shops and cafes emptied as they passed. Children were quickly ushered away by their guardians. It's like they're afraid of us, Michael whispered. More than afraid, Lisa observed. Look at their body language. They're treating us like we're contaminated. They were escorted to a section of the station that had been hastily converted into living quarters. The rooms were comfortable enough, but Sarah noticed immediately that all furniture had been bolted down at specific distances apart. There were no chairs close enough for two people to sit within arm's reach of each other. Ambassador Keth'ra arrived shortly after they'd settled in, but she remained in the doorway, flanked by guards. "Welcome to Station Nexus," she said, though her tone suggested anything but welcome. "I trust your accommodations are adequate." "They're fine, thank you," Sarah replied, taking a step forward. Immediately, all the guards raised what appeared to be energy weapons. "Maintain distance," Keth'ra commanded sharply. "There will be no physical approach permitted during these proceedings." Sarah stopped, raising her hands peacefully. "Ambassador, I think there may be some misunderstanding. We're here for diplomatic talks, not combat." Indeed, Keth'ra's silver skin shifted to a deeper hue, which their translators identified as indicating suspicion. "We're aware of your species' aggressive contact rituals. Such behavior will not be tolerated in Federation space." "Contact rituals?" Michael stepped up beside Sarah, careful to maintain the required distance. "Could you clarify what you mean?" Keth'ra gestured to one of her guards, who activated a holographic projector. Images filled the air showing humans in various everyday situations. Families hugging goodbye at airports, friends embracing after long separations, couples walking hand in hand, co-workers shaking hands after successful meetings. "These displays of dominance and territorial claiming," Keth'ra explained. "We have studied your species extensively. You use physical contact to establish hierarchy, claim ownership of others, and assert psychological control. Such behavior is antithetical to civilized society." Sarah stared at the images in bewilderment. "Ambassador, these aren't displays of dominance. These are expressions of affection, greeting, and emotional support. Physical contact is how humans show care and connection." "Precisely our concern," Keth'ra replied coldly. "You admit to using physical manipulation for emotional control. This confirms our assessment that your species poses a significant psychological threat to Federation citizens." Lisa pulled up her translation software, frantically searching for better words to explain human behavior. "Ambassador, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding here. When humans engage in physical contact, it's not about control or dominance. It's about bonding, comfort, and social connection. Social connection through physical manipulation." Dr. Zendar's voice crackled through a communication device. He was observing from a safe distance in an adjacent room. "This is exactly what makes your species so dangerous. You have weaponized physical contact for psychological warfare." The humans looked at each other in growing dismay. Sarah tried again. "Dr. Zendar, when a human child is upset, their parent might hug them to provide comfort. When friends meet after a long separation, they might embrace to show how much they missed each other. When someone is grieving, others might offer physical comfort through touch. These aren't weapons or manipulation tactics, they're expressions of love and support." There was a long silence. Finally, Commander Dextar's voice came through the communicator. "You speak of love and support, yet you describe forcing physical contact upon vulnerable individuals. Children who are distressed, beings who are grieving. You target those who are most psychologically susceptible to your contact manipulation." Michael ran his hands through his hair in frustration, careful not to let the gesture be misinterpreted as aggressive. You're describing it like we're predators. Physical affection is fundamental to human psychology. We need touch to develop properly as children, to maintain emotional health as adults, and to form meaningful relationships throughout our lives. Fascinating, Dr. Zendar replied. You admit that your species has evolved psychological dependency on physical contact. This explains the compulsive nature of your touching behaviors. Sarah felt a headache building. Doctor, it's not a dependency in a negative sense. It's a natural part of how we express emotion and maintain social bonds. Many species have similar behaviors, don't they? Absolutely not, Keth'ra said firmly. No civilized species engages in routine physical contact. The very concept is deeply disturbing to most Federation members. The first diplomatic session ended shortly after, with both sides more confused and suspicious than when they'd started. As the Federation representatives departed, maintaining their careful distance, Sarah gathered her team for debriefing. Well, Michael said, slumping into his isolated chair. That went about as badly as possible. They genuinely believe we're dangerous, Lisa observed. Not just different, but actually threatening to their psychological well-being. Sarah nodded slowly. The question is, how do we bridge a gap this fundamental? They see our most basic expressions of affection as acts of aggression. Over the following days, the situation only worsened. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The humans were kept in strict isolation, their movements monitored constantly. Any attempt to approach Federation citizens was met with immediate intervention by security forces. Meals were delivered by automated systems to prevent any possibility of contact. Dr. Torres tried to establish common ground through scientific discussion, arranging virtual meetings with Federation researchers. But even these conversations were strained by the fundamental disconnect in understanding physical contact. In human societies, he explained during one session, physical touch serves multiple functions. It releases hormones like oxytocin and dopamine that promote bonding and reduce stress. Children who don't receive adequate physical affection often develop psychological and even physical health problems. Dr. Zendar's response was immediate and alarmed. You're describing chemical dependency and withdrawal symptoms. This confirms that physical contact is indeed a form of psychological manipulation, creating artificial biochemical bonds. Not artificial, Michael protested. Natural. These are evolved responses that help humans form stable social groups and care for their young. Evolution towards psychological manipulation, Dr. Zendar countered. Your species has developed biological mechanisms to compel physical contact, presumably to establish dominance hierarchies more effectively. Meanwhile, Captain Chen tried a different approach with Ambassador Keth'ra, focusing on the practical aspects of their diplomatic mission. Ambassador, we understand there are cultural differences to work through, but surely we can find some common ground for cooperation. We have technologies and knowledge that could benefit the Federation, just as we hope to learn from your advanced civilization. Keth'ra remained unmoved. Captain, any potential benefits must be weighed against the psychological contamination risk your species represents. We have reports that prolonged exposure to human contact behaviors can cause distress and confusion among Federation citizens. What reports? Sarah asked. Our observation teams have noted changes in behavior among Federation personnel who have been monitoring your species. Increased interest in physical proximity, unexplained feelings of isolation when alone, and disturbing thoughts about engaging in contact behaviors themselves. Sarah's heart sank. Ambassador, those aren't signs of contamination. Those are signs that your people are experiencing loneliness and recognizing their need for social connection. Precisely, Keth'ra replied coldly. Your influence is already causing psychological instability among our citizens. This confirms the necessity of maintaining strict containment protocols. As the days passed, the human delegation found themselves increasingly isolated. The Federation had established a 3-meter perimeter around them at all times, enforced by energy barriers when necessary. Even their own ship was kept under constant surveillance, and any attempt to leave their designated areas resulted in immediate detention. The psychological toll was becoming evident. Lisa, who was naturally affectionate and used to casual contact with friends and colleagues, began showing signs of significant stress. She'd catch herself reaching out to touch Michael's shoulder during conversations, only to stop herself and apologize. "I feel like I'm going crazy," she admitted during one of their private debriefings. "I know it sounds stupid, but I miss being able to shake hands or give a reassuring pat on the back. I never realized how much I relied on touch for basic human interaction." Michael nodded sympathetically. "I've been thinking about my daughter back on Earth. She's only 6, and every night before bed she wants a hug and someone to tuck her in. The idea that the Federation sees that as some kind of psychological manipulation is heartbreaking." Sarah watched her team struggle with the enforced isolation and felt her own stress levels rising. As captain, she was used to being able to offer physical comfort to her crew during difficult times. A hand on the shoulder during a crisis, a congratulatory handshake after a successful mission, a supportive embrace during personal troubles. All of these basic human interactions had been criminalized by the Federation. The Federation representatives, meanwhile, were dealing with their own unexpected reactions to observing human behavior. Despite the no-contact protocols, they couldn't help but notice the way humans naturally gravitated toward each other. The unconscious gestures of support and affection. The obvious distress caused by enforced isolation. Ambassador Keth'ra found herself watching the security footage of the humans with growing fascination. There was something compelling about the way they interacted when they thought they were unobserved. When Lisa had received bad news from home about her grandmother's illness, she had instinctively turned to Michael for comfort. He had opened his arms, and she had stepped into his embrace, finding solace in the simple act of being held. Keth'ra had expected to see evidence of manipulation or control in such moments. Instead, she observed something she couldn't quite understand: genuine care and mutual support that seemed to flow both ways. The person offering the embrace appeared to receive as much comfort as the person receiving it. Dr. Zendar was having similar experiences in his analysis of human behavior patterns. His species communicated through mental connection, sharing thoughts and emotions directly. He had assumed that physical contact was a primitive substitute for such communication. But the more he observed, the more he realized that human physical affection served different purposes than mental communication. "There's something peculiar about their tactile interactions," he reported to the research committee. "The physical contact appears to provide a form of comfort and security that doesn't translate directly to mental or emotional exchange. It's as if the physical sensation itself carries meaning." Commander Dexter was perhaps the most troubled by his observations. His species had evolved from predatory ancestry and valued individual strength and independence. The idea of seeking comfort from others was foreign to his nature. Yet he found himself oddly affected by watching the humans support each other through their isolation. When Captain Chen had received word that her diplomatic mission might be terminated, and the human delegation expelled from Federation space, her visible distress had been painful to watch. Her team had immediately surrounded her, not with words or logical arguments, but with their presence and gentle touches of support. Her stress had visibly decreased, and her resolve had strengthened. Dexter couldn't understand how such simple physical contact could have such a profound effect. In his culture, weakness was hidden and overcome through individual effort. Yet the humans seemed to draw strength from each other in ways that made their group stronger than the sum of its parts. The breaking point came during the second week of negotiations. The Federation Council had decided that the risks posed by human contact behaviors were too great, and they were preparing to formally ban humanity from all Federation space. The humans would be escorted back to their own territory and forbidden from returning. Ambassador Keth'ra was tasked with delivering the news. She found the human delegation in their common area, gathered around a small table sharing a meal. Despite the isolation barriers, they had managed to create a sense of togetherness that was both puzzling and oddly moving. "Captain Chen," Keth'ra announced from the doorway, "the Federation Council has reached a decision regarding your species' application for diplomatic relations." Sarah looked up, her expression already showing that she anticipated bad news. "I see. And what have you decided, Ambassador?" "The Council has determined that human contact behaviors pose too great a risk to Federation psychological security. Your species will be classified as incompatible with civilized galactic society. You have 48 hours to depart Federation space and may not return." The words hit the human delegation like a physical blow. Lisa's shoulders sagged and Michael closed his eyes in disappointment. Sarah's face went pale, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. "I see," she said quietly. "Ambassador, may I ask one final question?" Keth'ra nodded curtly. "In all your observations of our behavior, in all your analysis of our contact rituals, have you ever seen us force physical affection on someone who didn't want it? Have you ever observed us using touch to harm or manipulate unwilling participants?" Keth'ra paused. The question struck at something she had been trying not to think about. In all the hours of surveillance footage, she had never seen humans engaging in forced contact. Every embrace, every handshake, every gentle touch had been freely given and received. "That's not the point," she replied, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "The risk of psychological manipulation remains." "What risk?" Sarah asked gently. "Ambassador, you've been watching us for 2 weeks. You've seen us isolated, stressed, and homesick. You've seen us support each other through disappointment and worry. Have you seen any evidence of actual manipulation or harm?" Before Keth'ra could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red as an automated voice announced a station-wide crisis. "Hull breach in Sector 7. Emergency containment protocols activated. All personnel to emergency stations." Keth'ra's communication device crackled to life with urgent reports. A cargo transport had suffered a critical systems failure during docking, causing a catastrophic accident. Multiple injuries were reported, and the station's medical facilities were being overwhelmed. "Ambassador," Sarah said, stepping toward the energy barrier that separated them. "Our ship has a full medical facility and trained emergency personnel. Let us help." Keth'ra shook her head automatically. "Impossible. Contact protocols forbid." Another announcement interrupted her. "Medical emergency in Sector 7. Critical injuries reported. All available medical personnel respond immediately." Sarah's training as both a captain and a former military medic kicked in. "Ambassador, people are hurt. Our protocols, your protocols, none of that matters right now. Let us help save lives." For a moment, Keth'ra hesitated. Everything in her training told her to maintain the barriers, to protect Federation citizens from human contact contamination. But the emergency reports were growing more urgent by the minute, and she could hear the strain in the medical team's communications. She began, then stopped as she received another urgent communication through her device. "Ambassador," came Dr. Zendar's voice, tight with stress. "We need additional medical personnel immediately. We have casualties who may not survive without immediate intervention." Sarah looked directly into Keth'ra's eyes. "Ambassador, I give you my word. We will provide medical assistance without any unnecessary physical contact. We'll follow your protocols as much as possible while still saving lives, please." The emergency alarms continued to blare, and reports of casualties mounted. Finally, Keth'ra made a decision that would change everything. "Lower the barriers," she commanded her security team. "Medical emergency override. But maintain constant surveillance." As the energy barriers dropped, the humans immediately sprang into action. Sarah contacted the Aurora and had her medical team prepare for emergency operations. Dr. Torres gathered his emergency medical supplies, while Lisa coordinated with station emergency services. They rushed through the corridors of the station, Keth'ra and her security team following closely. The scene that greeted them in Sector 7 was chaos. The cargo transport had collided with a docking assembly, causing explosions and structural collapse. Federation citizens of various species lay injured among the debris, while overwhelmed medical teams tried to triage the most critical cases. Dr. Torres immediately assessed the situation and began directing the human medical response. "Sarah, we need to establish a field hospital in that clear area. Lisa, coordinate with their emergency teams to identify the most critical patients." As the humans began working, something unexpected happened. Their natural instincts for physical comfort and reassurance kicked in automatically. When Dr. Torres knelt beside a severely injured Mentari citizen, he instinctively placed a gentle hand on the being's shoulder while administering treatment. The Mentari, who had been in significant distress, suddenly became calmer. The telepathic species was accustomed to mental communication, but the unexpected physical contact provided a different kind of comfort, a grounding sensation that helped reduce panic and fear. Keth'ra watched in fascination as Sarah worked with an injured child from the crystalline species. The young being was terrified and resistant to treatment, but when Sarah gently took their hand and spoke in soothing tones, the child relaxed enough to allow medical intervention. Throughout the emergency response, the humans provided medical care that went beyond technical skill. They offered comfort through gentle touches, reassuring presence, and the kind of emotional support that their contact-averse society had never experienced. Lisa found herself working with a team of Federation medical personnel who had been struggling to move injured patients safely. "Here, let me show you a technique we use," she said, demonstrating how humans coordinate physical assistance through touch and communication. "If you place your hand here, and I support from this angle, we can move them without causing additional injury." The Federation medics were initially reluctant, but the urgency of the situation overrode their cultural conditioning. As they worked together, sharing physical coordination and support, they began to understand something they had never experienced before: the efficiency and comfort that came from tactile cooperation. Commander Dextar observed a moment that would stay with him forever. An elderly Federation citizen had suffered severe injuries and was drifting in and out of consciousness. As Dr. Torres worked to stabilize the patient's condition, Michael sat beside them, simply holding their hand and speaking gentle words of encouragement. The old being's vital signs, which had been erratic and weak, began to stabilize. There was no medical explanation for the improvement, but the presence and gentle contact seemed to provide a form of healing that their advanced technology couldn't replicate. Hours later, as the emergency response wound down and the last patients were transferred to medical facilities, an unusual quiet settled over Sector 7. The Federation emergency responders and the human medical team found themselves standing together, exhausted but successful in their efforts to save lives. For the first time in 2 weeks, the rigid distance protocols had been abandoned out of necessity. Federation citizens and humans stood side by side, some still maintaining supportive contact after working together through the crisis. Ambassador Keth'ra approached Captain Chen, who was coordinating the final stages of the emergency response. For the first time since the humans had arrived, she came within arm's reach without security barriers between them. "Captain," she said quietly, "your team's assistance was invaluable today." Sarah looked up from her reports, noticing the change in Keth'ra's demeanor. "We were glad to help, Ambassador. This is what we do." "What you do?" Keth'ra asked. "Help people," Sarah replied simply. "When someone is hurt or in trouble, you help them. It doesn't matter if they're human or alien, friend or stranger. You help, because it's the right thing to do." As she spoke, Sarah unconsciously reached out and briefly touched Keth'ra's arm in a gesture of reassurance. It was an automatic human response, meant to emphasize her sincerity and provide comfort. Keth'ra froze at the unexpected contact. Every instinct told her to pull away, to call for security, to enforce the contamination protocols. But something unexpected happened instead. The touch, brief and gentle, didn't feel threatening or manipulative. It felt warm, reassuring. For just a moment, Keth'ra experienced something her species had never known: the simple comfort of friendly, physical contact. As Sarah realized what she had done and began to apologize, Keth'ra found herself not wanting the moment to end. The touch had conveyed something that words and technology couldn't communicate: genuine care and connection between two very different beings. Keth'ra struggled to find words for the experience. "That feeling, what was that?" Sarah looked confused. "What feeling, Ambassador?" "The contact. The touch. It was different than we expected." Dr. Zendar's voice came through Keth'ra's communication device, tight with his own confusion. "Ambassador, I've been monitoring my telepathic readings throughout the emergency response. Something unprecedented has occurred." "What do you mean?" Keth'ra asked. "The Federation personnel who worked in physical contact with humans are showing elevated levels of emotional well-being, reduced stress indicators, and increased cooperative behaviors. It's as if the physical contact has had therapeutic effects rather than manipulative ones." Commander Dextar approached the group, his usual rigid posture slightly relaxed. "Ambassador, I need to report something unusual. During the emergency, I observed behaviors that contradict our assessments of human contact manipulation." "Explain," Keth'ra requested. The humans provided physical comfort to injured Federation citizens without seeking anything in return. They offered touch and support to beings who were vulnerable, yet they made no attempt to exploit that vulnerability. If physical contact is indeed a manipulation tactic, why did they use it only to provide healing and comfort? The questions hung in the air as both species began to confront the possibility that their fundamental understanding of human behavior had been wrong. The emergency had forced them together, and in that crucible of crisis and cooperation, something new had emerged. Dr. Torres, overhearing the conversation, approached the group with the gentle manner that had made him such an effective diplomat. "If I may, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of human touch." Keth'ra nodded for him to continue. "Physical contact isn't something we use to control others," Michael explained. "It's something we share to connect with others. It's not about taking power. It's about sharing comfort, strength, and understanding. When we touch someone, we're saying, 'You're not alone.'" "Not alone," Dr. Zendar repeated through the communicator. His telepathic species had never experienced loneliness in the way other beings did, but the events of the day had given him a glimpse into what isolation might feel like. As the human and Federation teams worked together to complete the emergency cleanup, the rigid barriers that had defined their interaction began to soften. Federation personnel found themselves working alongside humans, sharing tools and coordinating efforts through natural physical cooperation. Lisa demonstrated how humans use touch to communicate during complex tasks. A hand on the shoulder to indicate position, gentle guidance to show technique, supportive contact during difficult maneuvers. What the Federation had interpreted as dominance behaviors were revealed to be sophisticated forms of cooperation and communication. The day's events had created cracks in the foundation of Federation policy toward humanity. As the human delegation prepared to return to their quarters, the usual security escort seemed less rigid, the required distances less strictly enforced. Ambassador Keth'ra found herself walking alongside Captain Chen rather than maintaining her usual formal distance. The brief moment of contact earlier had left her with questions she couldn't answer and feelings she couldn't understand. "Captain," she said as they approached the human quarters, "the Federation Council expects my final report tomorrow. They will want to know if the emergency response changed anything about our assessment of your species." Sarah looked at her thoughtfully. "What will you tell them, Ambassador?" Keth'ra was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not certain. Today challenged many of our assumptions, but policy decisions require more than personal observations." "I understand," Sarah replied. "But, Ambassador, may I ask you something personal?" Keth'ra nodded. "When I touched your arm earlier, how did it make you feel?" The question was simple, but it struck at the heart of everything that had changed during the emergency response. Keth'ra found herself remembering the moment, the unexpected warmth and comfort that had passed between them. It felt... She paused, struggling to find words in her language for an experience she'd never had before. It felt like connection. Like I wasn't alone in a vast universe, but part of something larger. Sarah smiled gently. "That's what human touch is really about, Ambassador. Not control or manipulation, but connection and shared experience. It's how we remind each other that we're part of the same story." As the human delegation settled into their quarters for what might be their final night on the station, the impact of the day's events rippled throughout the Federation community. Medical personnel compared notes on the unexpected effectiveness of human healing techniques. Security officers discussed the cooperative behaviors they had observed. Scientists analyzed data that challenged decades of assumptions about interspecies contact. But perhaps the most significant change was occurring in the minds of the Federation leadership. For the first time, they were beginning to question whether their fear of human contact had blinded them to something important about the nature of connection and community. The emergency session of the Federation Supreme Council convened at dawn, the crystalline chambers filled with an unprecedented urgency. High Chancellor Vexmaran, whose species had governed galactic affairs for over a millennium, called the assembly to order with grave concern etched across his translucent features. "Distinguished delegates," his voice resonated through the quantum communication networks reaching 47 worlds simultaneously. "Yesterday's events have created a crisis that threatens the very foundations of our civilization." The holographic displays around the chamber showed footage from the station emergency, images that had been analyzed frame by frame throughout the night. Federation medical teams working alongside humans, barriers broken down, The unthinkable happening. Willing physical contact between species. Ambassador Keth'ra stood before the assembly, her report prepared but her confidence shaken. The simple touch from Captain Chen had left her with sleepless hours, wrestling with sensations and emotions her species had no words for. "The contamination has begun," declared Senator Quilnax from the rigid collective, his mechanical voice cutting through the chamber's tension. "Our personnel have been exposed to human manipulation tactics. Already we see behavioral changes, increased proximity seeking, diminished individual boundaries." Dr. Zendar projected his findings from the medical center, his telepathic communications translated for the non-psychic species. Physiological scans of exposed personnel show elevated production of bonding chemicals, increased neural activity in social processing centers, and what can only be described as addiction-like responses to physical proximity. High Chancellor Vexmoran absorbed the reports with growing alarm. "Dr. Zendar, are you confirming that human contact behaviors are indeed a form of biological warfare?" "The evidence suggests." Dr. Zendar paused, uncertainty creeping into his mental projections. "Something far more complex than we initially understood. The affected personnel report feelings of well-being, reduced anxiety, and enhanced cooperative instincts. If this is warfare, it operates unlike any threat we have previously encountered." Commander Dextar, who had observed the emergency response firsthand, requested permission to address the Council. "Honorable Chancellor, I must report observations that complicate our current understanding." "Proceed," Vexmoran commanded. "During the crisis, I witnessed human contact behaviors in life-threatening situations. If these were manipulation tactics, logic dictates they would be employed for strategic advantage. Instead, humans used physical contact exclusively to provide comfort and healing, often at personal risk with no apparent benefit to themselves." The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs. Senator Quilnax's mechanical systems whirred with agitation. "Commander, you describe altruistic behavior. This suggests the human manipulation is so sophisticated that victims actively defend their manipulators." "Or," came a quiet voice from the chamber's upper levels, "it suggests we have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of human contact." The assembly turned toward the speaker, Dr. Waylara from the Research Division, whose species specialized in behavioral analysis across the galaxy. She rarely spoke in council sessions, preferring observation to participation. "Dr. Waylara," the Chancellor acknowledged, "you have findings to present?" "I have spent the night analyzing communication patterns from the affected personnel," she continued, her voice carrying unusual conviction. "They describe experiences that our current framework cannot adequately explain. They speak of feeling connected, supported, and less alone. These are not descriptions of manipulation victims." The footage played again on the main displays, humans and Federation citizens working together during the emergency, the natural emergence of cooperative touching, the visible reduction in stress and panic when physical contact was established. "What you observe," Dr. Waylara explained, "may not be contamination or manipulation, but something our civilization has never experienced. Genuine physical bonding behavior evolved for mutual benefit rather than dominance." The silence that followed was profound. For generations, the Federation had built its success on the principle of individual sovereignty and non-interference. The idea that physical contact could be mutually beneficial challenged the very core of their social structure. High Chancellor Vexmoran called for a brief recess, during which urgent private communications flowed between species representatives. When the session resumed, the atmosphere had shifted from alarm to something approaching desperation. "The situation has escalated," the Chancellor announced. "Reports are arriving from across the station. Personnel who participated in yesterday's emergency response are exhibiting what can only be described as withdrawal symptoms." The displays changed to show medical bay footage. Federation citizens who had worked alongside humans now displaying signs of distress, seeking out the company of others who had shared the contact experience, expressing desires to repeat the physical cooperation they had experienced. Dr. Zendar's mental projection carried notes of panic. The addiction appears to be spreading through psychological contagion. Personnel are requesting assignment to human interaction duties. Some have attempted to recreate the contact behaviors among themselves. "This confirms our worst fears," Senator Quilnax declared. The humans have introduced a psychological virus that spreads through observation and experience. We must implement immediate quarantine protocols. But Commander Dexter interrupted with reports from the station's security division. Chancellor, I must inform the Council that quarantine may no longer be possible. The affected personnel are not responding to isolation protocols. They are actively resisting separation from contact experiences. The chamber's atmosphere grew increasingly tense as reports continued to arrive. What had begun as a containment issue was rapidly becoming a social crisis throughout the station. Meanwhile, in their designated quarters, the human delegation was experiencing their own crisis. The brief respite from isolation during the emergency had made their return to quarantine even more difficult to bear. Dr. Torres sat across from Captain Chen, the enforced distance between them feeling more unnatural than ever. Sarah, I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. The way the Federation personnel responded to basic human contact, it was like they were experiencing something completely new. Lisa monitored communications from the station's main systems, her technical skills allowing her to observe the growing crisis unfolding throughout the Federation community. Michael, it's not just new to them. I think we've accidentally demonstrated something they've never had. The psychological benefits of physical affection. Captain Chen reviewed the diplomatic protocols she had studied before the mission, searching for precedents or guidelines for their unprecedented situation. If that's true, then we're not just dealing with cultural differences. We're dealing with a civilization that has evolved without one of the most fundamental aspects of social bonding. The implications were staggering. Humans had always assumed that physical affection was a universal trait among social species. The possibility that an entire galactic civilization had developed without it explained their extreme reactions to human behavior. It would explain everything, Michael realized. Their fear, their interpretation of our behavior as manipulation, their inability to understand the therapeutic benefits of touch. They've built a civilization based on emotional isolation. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ambassador Keth'ra, but this time she came alone, without security escorts or protective barriers. Her silver skin showed color patterns that their translation systems couldn't interpret, indicating emotional states beyond their current understanding. "Captain Chen," she said, approaching closer than she had ever come before, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer with complete honesty." Sarah stood, instinctively wanting to offer whatever comfort or support she could. "Of course, Ambassador. What do you need to know?" "Yesterday, when you touched my arm, when you made physical contact with me." Keth'ra's voice carried vulnerability that was completely unlike her previous diplomatic demeanor. "What was your intention? What did you hope to accomplish?" The question hung in the air, loaded with the weight of potential galactic consequences. Sarah considered her response carefully, understanding that her answer might determine the future of human Federation relations. "Ambassador, my intention was simply to offer comfort and reassurance. When humans make gentle physical contact during conversation, we're expressing care and emphasizing our sincerity. I wanted you to know that I genuinely meant what I was saying about helping people." "Comfort," Keth'ra repeated the word as if testing its meaning. "You sought to provide comfort to someone you barely knew, someone who represented a government that was rejecting your people." "Yes," Sarah replied simply. "You seemed troubled, and offering comfort is a natural human response to someone in distress." Keth'ra processed this answer, her skin colors shifting through patterns that suggested deep contemplation. "Captain, since yesterday, I have been experiencing sensations that my species has no words for. A feeling of emptiness when alone, a desire for the presence of others, and memory of that brief moment of contact that brings both comfort and longing." Dr. Torres leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. "Ambassador, with respect, what you're describing sounds like the beginning of understanding what humans call loneliness and the need for emotional connection." "Loneliness," Keth'ra tested the word. "A condition of distress caused by lack of companionship?" "More than that," Lisa added gently. "It's the recognition that we're social beings, who need connection with others to feel complete. Physical touch is one of the ways we establish and maintain those connections. The conversation was interrupted by urgent communications reaching Keth'ra's device. Emergency reports flooded in from across the station. Federation personnel abandoning their posts to seek out others who had shared the contact experience, attempts to recreate human-style physical cooperation, and growing resistance to the isolation protocols that had governed their society for millennia. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, Keth'ra reported, her usual composure cracking. The High Council is meeting in emergency session to discuss extreme measures. What kind of extreme measures? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Complete elimination of human presence from Federation space, memory modification for affected personnel, and potential military action to prevent the spread of what they're calling psychological contamination. The humans exchanged alarmed glances. What had begun as a diplomatic mission was rapidly escalating toward interstellar conflict. Ambassador, Sarah said urgently, before the Council makes irreversible decisions, would it be possible for them to speak directly with the affected personnel? To understand what they're actually experiencing rather than just observing the symptoms? Keth'ra's skin patterns shifted to what appeared to be hope mixed with fear. You believe direct testimony might change their perspective. I believe, Michael interjected, that fear of the unknown is driving their decisions. If they could understand that what's happening isn't contamination but awakening, they might see the situation differently. The Emergency Council session reconvened with the addition of affected personnel willing to testify about their experiences. Medical technician Rolvan from the crystalline species was among the first to speak, his translucent form flickering with unusual energy patterns. Honorable Council, he began, I participated in the emergency medical response alongside the humans. I request permission to describe my experience accurately rather than through the filter of predetermined assumptions. High Chancellor Vex'maran granted permission, though his concern was evident. When the human medical officer showed me how to coordinate patient transport through physical cooperation, I initially felt the expected revulsion at contact. But as we worked together, something unexpected occurred. The physical connection enhanced our ability to communicate and coordinate. More than that, it provided a sense of shared purpose and mutual support that I had never experienced. Dr. Zendar's mental projections carried skepticism. Technician Rolvan, you describe enhanced performance through contact. This supports the theory that humans use touch to influence behavior. With respect, Dr. Zendar, that interpretation misses the essential element of mutuality. The humans did not gain control over my actions. Instead, we achieved a level of cooperation that benefited both parties equally. Security Officer Nextall from the Armored Collective requested permission to speak. Council members, I observed something during the emergency that challenges our understanding of human aggression. Explain, Commander Dextar prompted. When injured children were brought to the medical area, they were naturally fearful and resistant to treatment. Standard protocol would be restraint and sedation. Instead, the humans used gentle physical contact to calm the children, allowing medical intervention without force or coercion. Manipulation of vulnerable subjects, Senator Quilmax interjected. No, Nextall insisted. Comfort freely offered and gratefully received. The children became calm because they felt safe, not because they were controlled. The testimony continued for hours, with affected personnel describing experiences that consistently contradicted the Council's assumptions about human contact behavior. They spoke of feeling connected rather than controlled, supported rather than manipulated, and part of something larger rather than individually dominated. Dr. Waylara presented her analysis of the testimony, her findings challenging the very foundations of Federation social policy. Honorable Council, the consistent pattern in these reports suggests that human physical contact serves functions that our civilization has never developed. Rather than individual sovereignty maintained through isolation, humans have evolved cooperative sovereignty enhanced through connection. Quote, cooperative sovereignty, High Chancellor Vex'maran repeated. You suggest that physical contact enhances rather than diminishes individual autonomy? The evidence indicates that humans who engage in appropriate physical affection demonstrate increased confidence, enhanced decision-making abilities, and stronger individual identity. The contact appears to strengthen rather than weaken the self. The implications of this analysis rippled through the chamber. If true, it meant that Federation society had built its success on the avoidance of something that could actually enhance their civilization. But it was the arrival of new footage that truly transformed the Council's understanding. Station security had captured scenes of Federation personnel who had worked with humans during the emergency, now naturally engaging in contact behaviors among themselves. The recordings showed something unprecedented in Federation history. Citizens of different species sharing gentle touches of comfort and support, working together with unprecedented cooperation, and displaying levels of contentment and social harmony that had never been observed in their isolated society. "They're not becoming more human," Dr. Waylara observed. "They're becoming more themselves, but with the addition of connection they never knew was possible." The final testimony came from Ambassador Keth'ra herself, who approached the Council podium with unusual vulnerability. "Distinguished colleagues," she began, "I must confess that my personal experience with human contact has profoundly affected my perspective on this crisis." The chamber fell silent as one of their most respected diplomats prepared to describe her own contamination experience. "Yesterday, Captain Chen briefly touched my arm in a gesture of comfort and reassurance. In that moment, I experienced something that our language cannot adequately describe. I felt, for the first time in my existence, that I was not alone in the universe." The impact of her words was immediate. Ambassador Keth'ra was known for her emotional control and diplomatic precision. To hear her describe such a profound personal experience carried weight that no scientific analysis could match. "The sensation was not one of being controlled or manipulated," she continued. "It was one of being acknowledged, valued, and included in a community of caring beings. Since that moment, I have come to understand that what we call individual sovereignty may actually be individual isolation." High Chancellor Vexmaran leaned forward in his seat. "Ambassador, are you suggesting that our entire social structure is fundamentally flawed?" "I am suggesting," Keth'ra replied with quiet conviction, "that our social structure is incomplete. We have achieved remarkable technological and intellectual advancement, but we have done so at the cost of emotional and social connection that appears to be fundamental to the well-being of conscious beings." The chamber erupted in debate as the implications of her statement spread through the assembly. Some delegates argued for stronger isolation protocols to prevent further contamination. Others questioned whether what they were witnessing was contamination at all. Senator Quilnax stood to address the chamber, his mechanical systems registering unprecedented levels of processing activity. "Fellow delegates, we face a choice that will define the future of our civilization. Do we classify human contact behavior as a threat to be eliminated? Or do we acknowledge it as an advancement to be studied?" The debate continued through the night, but gradually a consensus began to emerge. The affected personnel were not showing signs of manipulation or control. They were showing signs of enhanced well-being, increased cooperation, and deeper social satisfaction than had ever been recorded in Federation history. Dr. Zendar, whose telepathic abilities gave him unique insight into the mental states of others, provided the analysis that finally shifted the Council's perspective. "Distinguished Council," he projected, "I have conducted deep telepathic scans of the affected personnel. What I have discovered challenges everything we thought we knew about consciousness and social connection." He paused, his mental projection carrying notes of wonder and revelation. "The humans have not implanted foreign thoughts or emotions in our citizens. Instead, they have awakened capacities that were already present but dormant. The ability to bond through physical contact appears to be a universal trait of conscious beings that our civilization has simply never developed." The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. If Dr. Zendar's analysis was correct, then human contact behavior wasn't alien contamination, but the rediscovery of something fundamental to conscious life. High Chancellor Vexmaran called for a final vote on the human question, but the options had changed dramatically from the session's beginning. No longer were they voting on whether to expel a dangerous species. They were voting on whether to embrace a form of social evolution that could transform their entire civilization. The vote was closer than anyone had anticipated, but ultimately the evidence of enhanced well-being among the affected personnel proved decisive. By a narrow margin, the Federation Council voted to reclassify human contact behavior from psychological warfare to advanced social technology. Ambassador Keth'ra was tasked with delivering the news to the human delegation, but this time she approached their quarters without security escorts or protective barriers. She found them gathered in their common area, the space they had made warm and welcoming, despite the sterile station environment. "Captain Chen," she said, entering the room and approaching within comfortable conversation distance. "The Federation Council has reached a decision." Sarah looked up from the reports she had been reviewing, her expression prepared for disappointment. "And what have you decided, Ambassador?" "We have voted to formally apologize for our misunderstanding of your species," Keth'ra replied, her voice carrying emotions that were still new to her experience. "We would like to request your assistance in learning what we now understand to be advanced social bonding techniques." The relief on the humans' faces was immediate and profound. Lisa actually laughed with joy, while Dr. Torres closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Ambassador," Sarah said, standing and instinctively moving closer, "we would be honored to help your people explore the benefits of physical affection and social connection." As she spoke, Sarah naturally extended her hand toward Keth'ra, offering the simple gesture of a handshake. This time, instead of recoiling or calling for security, Keth'ra stepped forward and took the offered hand in both of her own. The contact was gentle, warm, and filled with the promise of understanding between two very different species who had discovered they shared fundamental needs for connection and community. "There is so much we need to learn," Keth'ra said, still holding Sarah's hand. "About friendship, about comfort, about what it means to truly not be alone." "We'll take it one step at a time," Sarah replied with a smile. "After all, the best things in life are discovered gradually, through trust and mutual understanding." As word of the Council's decision spread throughout the station, something unprecedented began to happen. Federation citizens who had heard about the contact experiences started approaching the human quarters, curious about these new forms of social connection they had heard described. Dr. Torres organized informal sessions where humans demonstrated basic forms of affectionate contact: handshakes, gentle pats on the shoulder, and eventually, for those who were interested, the human practice of hugging. The first interspecies hug between Lisa and medical technician Rolvon became legendary throughout the station. Both beings approached the experience with careful curiosity, and when their arms wrapped around each other in the gentle embrace, both reported an immediate sense of connection and well-being that transformed their understanding of what social interaction could be. Within days, physical affection began spreading throughout the station as Federation citizens discovered the joy of connection they had never known was possible. The rigid distances that had defined their society for millennia gave way to a new culture of caring touch and mutual support. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some Federation citizens found the adjustment to physical affection difficult, and human advisors worked carefully to ensure that all contact remained consensual and comfortable for everyone involved. But for the vast majority of the station's population, the introduction of human-style physical affection brought improvements in mental health, social cooperation, and overall life satisfaction that exceeded all expectations. Ambassador Keth'ra became one of the strongest advocates for the new social policies, working directly with human advisors to develop guidelines for healthy physical affection that respected the needs and boundaries of all Federation species. "We spent so long fearing contamination," she reflected during one of her daily meetings with Captain Chen, "that we never considered the possibility of enhancement." 6 months later, the Federation formally voted to invite humanity into their alliance as full partners, recognizing them not as a primitive species to be managed, but as advanced social beings whose understanding of connection and community could benefit the entire galaxy. The ban on human hugs was not only lifted, but replaced with mandatory education programs on the benefits of appropriate physical affection. What had begun as a diplomatic crisis had evolved into a social revolution that transformed one of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. And throughout the Federation, beings who had spent their entire lives in emotional isolation discovered for the first time what it meant to truly not be alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.